Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we're trying to climb to 2200 rapid elo while explaining my thought process as best as I can for your education and entertainment. And today we have another Slav defense. We had that in the previous episode as well, which was a very interesting video. We have knight f3, we're just going to go knight to f6. Now what's interesting about the Slav is that, in this kind of position, typically, I don't actually play it, but let's say we were to have played e6 rather than c6, then a lot of the time, black might mirror what white is doing and play something like c5 and knight to c6, right? But with the pawn on c6, we kind of somewhat imbalance the position by having a stronger center on d5 than maybe white has because the c-pawn isn't defending it. But of course, white has pressure on our center. We don't really have pressure on the white center. We're not being too ambitious for the time being. And by playing the move e6, which transposes into the semi-Slav defense, we build this big pawn pyramid. And after bishop g5, knight bd7, we might actually get the same line that we did in the previous video, which after queen to a5, the Cambridge Springs defense, we have exactly. Now, I've learned some things since the previous video where my opponent played bishop takes f6, which is a perfectly valid line, alongside c takes d5, and the best move being knight back to d2. And knight d2 accomplishes several things. Firstly, it breaks the pin on this knight on c3, right? Meaning that moves like knight to e4 aren't particularly effective because the knight can always be taken. And also supports c4, so that if we take on c4, trying to open up ideas against this bishop, which we very well may do, then after something like bishop takes and knight takes c4, that can come with tempo on the queen. So I think here I'm looking at two moves in particular. One being bishop to b4, just applying pressure on this diagonal. And if a move like a3, maybe we can snap up the pawn and try to play that position up a pawn. Alternatively, we could potentially take on c4, and if knight takes, of course, that would hang the bishop. So something like pawn takes, bishop takes, knight takes, knight takes. And I think the main line is something like queen to c7, and then, we develop, we castle, and we have the bishop pair. Our dark squared bishop isn't that... our light squared bishop isn't that impressive, but we do have the bishop pair. Personally, I think I prefer bishop to b4, just personal preference. Queen c2, okay, defending the knight, of course, and developing the queen, potentially building a battery with the bishop down the line, and I suppose exerting more control over the e4 square, if I ever want to put a knight there, which, I might want to do. But, okay. Okay, this is an interesting position. Part of me wants to play pawn c5, which I'm not sure if that's overly ambitious, but it looks to me like our center is defended well enough to go for that. If a move like knight to b3, we can always take with... Wait. No, if a move like knight b3, if we take with check and pawn takes, our queen and pawn are hit. Queen b6. Bishop takes f6. gf6 is probably forced, which I don't really want to play. Okay, so alternatively, we can take on c4, forcing bishop f6, knight f6, knight c4. We could try queen g5, but it feels incorrect. I think we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble in those positions sometimes. But I do think it's the correct decision to take on c4. Now, I don't think bishop takes is that good. Of course, obviously, after bishop takes f6, one of the whole points of the Cambridge Springs, putting the queen on a5, being that if we ever take on c4, it comes with an attack on the bishop. So here we win the bishop pair, which is nice, but, it's not game-ending by any means. Okay, so knight c4, hitting our queen, pressure on d6. So, we wouldn't want to do something like well, I don't even know. Like, take and queen g5, allowing knight to d6. We don't want to do that, for example. But we don't have to move our bishop, right? We don't have to take. We don't have to move it yet. For now, our queen is under attack, and we need to decide where we're going to put her. So the move I really want to play is queen g5. Something tells me, though, that it's wrong. I know I've played it before in similar positions, and the engine hasn't been happy with me. I think it was because of moves like h4 or f4. It was one of the two, and it just got me into lots of trouble. If I remember correctly, queen h5, bishop e2, that doesn't really make much sense. I think queen c7 perhaps is the better move. Just controlling this knight's forward movement, right? You should be aware of the relationship between a bishop or a queen and a knight when there are two squares between them, where the knight's forward movement is controlled well by either a queen or a bishop. Of course, they both perform the same purpose. And my opponent goes a3, asking my bishop what it wants to do. So taking, to me, looks very wrong. I don't like the look of it whatsoever. Alternatively, we could drop the bishop back to e7. And have to remove, like, knight to e5, maybe. I don't know. I don't love it. Part of me wants to play bishop d6, allowing this bishop trade. But, sorry, allowing the trade of the knight for the bishop, but preparing to play e5 to liberate my light squared bishop. Which feels like a good plan to me. I mean, the counter argument is, well, we've got all of our central pawns on light squares. So do we really want to be giving up our dark squared bishop? Like, isn't that supposed to be the good bishop? And the answer is yes, but at the same time, this knight is very strong. And it's probably going to come to e5. And if I do something like, let's say bishop e7, knight e5, bishop to d6, right? Then maybe a move like f4 is going to be killer. Just locking the knight in place. So I think I'm going to go bishop to d6. Yeah, and he takes. Let's take back. And, I mean, I don't mind this position. Like, I would say we've transferred from the opening into the middle game now. Just, it feels like a middle game to me. I mean, material is equal. White has a d pawn, we have a c pawn, so there's a bit of imbalance there. White has a bit more central space. Our bishop isn't amazing, but we can probably go e5 or even b6, bishop b7, and c5 to liberate it. So I'm not too concerned about that. We could go for the immediate e5, which, let's say e5, rook d1. What, bishop e6? That looks fine to me. If take, we just take back with the queen. That's not a problem. Yeah, e5 feels right. I think we should play that as soon as possible, because while I want to castle... Okay, and that's a good counter-argument from my opponent. Okay. Knight e4. Alright, so if I take and take, then my e-pawn is incredibly weak, and I can't take because the pawn is pinned. And if I were to castle... Queen takes, pawn takes. I'm not convinced. I don't like that. We just down a pawn for nothing. I also can't really play a move like bishop f5 because knight d6 comes with check and we lose absolutely everything. The alternative is a move like queen e7, just defending everything. If knight takes, then queen takes. Maybe then he can go queen e4, though. Maybe e5 is premature. Yeah, I didn't think knight e4 was a problem, but... Knight takes, queen takes. Castles. White just doesn't really have any exploitable weaknesses. The only real weakness is on b2, but I haven't got a good way of going after that square because b4 is covered by the pawn, so I can't put my queen on b4. So that's not going to work. If I go queen... Well, queen e6 blocks in the bishop, which I probably don't want to do. So maybe like queen e7, knight takes, and maybe I just play pawn takes. Maybe that's the way to do it. Because if I take with the queen, then queen e4 is a problem. But if I take with the pawn, if queen e4, my pawn is well defended. And I don't know. Maybe I can go like bishop to d7, castle queenside, and try and use the open g file later. That's an option. I'm not concerned about knight c5. That's really not a big deal to me. Maybe no. Queen c7? No, queen c7 wouldn't be any good. Yeah, so if I take with the queen here, then after queen e4, I feel like I'm in a bit of trouble. Because, let's say bishop f5, queen e5, de5, let's say castle queenside. I'm not posing any threat to the white position. And e5 is going to be supported with the move f4, and there's basically nothing I can do about that. So I don't really want to go down a pawn for no reason, hence why I think gf6 is forced. Which, of course, is not a move I really want to play. Like, I'm not thrilled about this, but it feels to be the best option. My opponent is playing extremely quickly. Extremely quickly. Castles is slightly surprising. I guess I thought that he was going to go queen e4. But now I have the chance to stop him by playing pawn e4. I mean, d5, I can just take that. So I mean, like, pawn e4, pawn f5, bishop e6 maybe. Looks interesting. I could go after the king, but I mean, it's easy to defend, so... I could also take, but I completely ruin my pawn structure. Alternatively, I could go bishop to e... Oh yeah, no, bishop e6 has got to be the move. Bishop f3. Castle queenside. Yeah, I think going for the opposite side castling is a good idea. And the point is that now queen e4 doesn't work because of bishop to d5. I mean, maybe there's queen f5 there, but worst case, I can go for some kind of repetition. I don't know. White should really be pushing for a win in this position. So I doubt he'd want that anyway, regardless of the small rating difference. But the reason I was concerned about queen e4 in this position is because then I can't go bishop to e6 because my opponent just plays take, take, take. And I'm just down a pawn. So, slightly surprised, I have to admit. But, you know, we take that. And maybe I'm incorrect anyway. Okay, rook d1 makes sense. I really do want a castle queenside. I mean, b4, b5 is very scary, though. That's not something that I particularly enjoy seeing. I mean, I could still castle kingside and put my king on h8. Another option. I could go... Nah, rook d8 without being castled first seems a bit silly to me. I think I'm going to castle kingside. Because, yeah, castling queenside looks very, very risky. And white can throw his pawns at me very quickly. Whereas I have no good way of attacking the white king. I mean, you know, I can put a rook on g8 and go bishop h3. But after I move like bishop f3 or pawn to g3, I mean, my attack feels like it's completely gone already. So... And also, considering that d5 could be a break, and the c6 pawn is going to be super, super weak with the ideas of d5 and b5 coming very quickly, I don't want to have to deal with that. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd really appreciate that. Queen e4 feels like it encourages me to take this diagonal, though. I mean, if queen g4, king h8... I'm just bringing a rook to the g file, and then I'm actually doing something useful. I mean, maybe I can even go for f5, f4. Okay, that's interesting. So if take, I can't take back with the pawn because my queen hangs. Sure. Other than that, I mean, bishop d3, going for checkmate, I suppose. I could go pawn e4, but it is blocking my own bishop. If king h8, take, king h8, bishop d3, pawn e4. Let's say bishop c2. Queen e6, pawn f3, pawn f5. It feels passive, but I mean, maybe beggars can't be choosers. There is rook a to e8, so if take, I can take, because my queen's defended. Oh, I didn't mean to mess with the size of the board. Have I fixed it? I think so. No, I haven't. Okay, I think that's better. Sorry. Okay, so if rook a to e8 and my opponent goes bishop to d3, there's some interesting options like pawn f5. And after take... Oh no, there's queen g3. But even queen g3, king h8, bishop d3, I should be good there. This is interesting. Okay, I'm going to go rook a to e8 because I don't think I actually want to try to challenge my opponent on the e-file. I am, however, realizing that pawn e4 is slightly annoying. Trying to play for d5 ideas. It does block this diagonal off for the white bishop, which is good. It does kind of, however, freeze my f pawn on f6 when I would love to put it on f5 at some point, which is a downside. But if the immediate e4 is played, I can probably just take because the bishop's hit. Okay, bishop to g4. Can I go for this f5 idea? I don't know. Take. If pawn takes, I can go rook to e2, which was my plan. But he can go rook takes, so that doesn't work, unfortunately. My idea was to sack a pawn to get a rook to the second rank, and I feel like we've got a lot of pressure there. Okay, so bishop f5 threatens bishop to... Sorry, bishop g4 threatens bishop f5, which is not a fun move to see. So perhaps we have to go for a move like bishop e4, cutting that off. Does line my bishop up with his queen, which I'm not thrilled about. Pawn f5. Queen e7 forced. Rook e7, bishop f5. Down a pawn. There is this cool bishop to b3 move. Because if rook to d3 does bishop c2, winning a piece. Maybe just bishop e6. I don't know if I want to trade bishops, though. King h8, bishop f5, I mean, I have no way of defending checkmate. I'm just getting mated. So I can't do that. Can't do that. Bishop e4. Bishop d7, take. Pawn f5. That looks fine. Ish. Sort of. Okay, f5. Take. Bishop here, rook d2. Or maybe rook e1. Yeah, maybe rook e1. I feel like we have play there. I am sacrificing a pawn, but at the same time, the f6 pawn wasn't a particularly good pawn, right? It wasn't very impressive. So maybe this is a good good alternative line. Now, I've got to make sure I don't play something like ed4 here, because after rook d4, I mean, I don't really know where my counterplay is. Just e4 is going to come at some point, and my position is going to be horrific. I want to have play for being down a pawn. So bishop b3, you can't go here because of this. So I think I should play this to ask the rook what it's doing. And potentially free up the d file for my own rook. Also, if the d file opens, it might be the case that white can't challenge me because I control d1. And the black Sorry, the white bishop won't be able to say the same about the d8 square, because it's a dark square. So that could be very useful. If rook to e1, I have the power to open and shut the e-file as I please. As in, white can't open the e-file. He needs me to allow it, which is good. Good for me to have that power. I am also thinking... So I have two clear options. Taking looks bad to me. Well, I don't know. Like, take a rook e8. Take. I mean, it's okay, but... King f1, I have bishop to c4 check, I suppose. Forcing the king back. Bishop d3. Yeah, bishop d3 is a strong move. Although I can just go rook d8, I suppose. And then I go to d2, and that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think I have good play for being down a pawn. So, okay, taking is an option, but the moves I was more so looking at was rook d8 or rook e8. Because again, he can't challenge me on the d-file, nor can he kick my bishop away. He has no way of doing that. So let's say rook e8. Well, then he just takes and probably goes e4, and he's okay. So that's no good in my opinion. Alternatively, I can consider rook to... No, rook here, take. Yeah, well, his bishop's hit. The bishop has to move. Then I go to d2. Then he can't challenge me. I think rook d8. And again, I'm basically trying to be the one in charge of which files open and when. Because, I mean, white can open the d file if he wants by taking. But he can't challenge me on the d file because my bishop, and he can't get rid of my bishop. That's the point. His bishop isn't playing a particularly active role in the game currently. I mean, yes, the bishop just won him a pawn. It's eyeing up h7, I guess. But h7 is, of course, defended. The issue is, however, that my bishop is controlling, I would say, the second most important square on the board. e1 and d1 are the most important squares on the board for white right now, because from there, he can control his second rank. The issue is, he can't go to d1, so it's very difficult for him to control the d2 square, and it's hard for him to use the e2 square to control the second rank because of moves like taking and opening up attacks on his rook. He also can't really support the rook with a bishop on d3 because I can open things up against it potentially, or a king on f1 because my bishop can always drop back to c4 with some kind of pin or check. So yeah, like I said, we're down a pawn, but we are more active, and this is definitely something I'm trying to get better at. Like, you know, back in this position, this is a very sad position, and I'm trying to choose between the more materialistic approach, I suppose, of bishop e4, where white gets the d file and all the fun, and I try to hang on to my pawn. And maintain material equality, or I sacrifice a pawn and go into an endgame where I think I've got more play. And I think that's a very difficult decision to make, but being down one pawn in the endgame, particularly if it turns into a rook endgame, which it may well do, isn't really that big a deal. Okay, my opponent goes pawn h3, so he's happy to give me the pawn back, which I think is a smart decision, and creates luft for his king. The question is, do I want to take that? Do I want to take this? Because after take, rook e7. f7 could be weak, but it's fine for now. b7 is weak, and that's much more difficult to defend. And then a7 hangs if b7 goes. The question, though, is do I actually have to make a decision? Not necessarily. Because you still can't really take me because I've taken this. I want to play king f8 to stop rook e7, but that hangs h7. Maybe pawn h6. preparing king f8. And also, I mean, h7 was going to be a perennial weakness. So I was also considering pawn f6 that a rook defends h7. But I would rather the rook be doing this, to be honest. So again, like, I'm trying not to break the tension too quickly here because I think white, again, essentially found a way to sacrifice the pawn back to me, restore material equality, but get a rook on e7 in exchange in that line, which I think is better for white, to be honest, because I think the white rook has better targets on b7, a7, and f7, and h7, with the bishop helping out. So I don't think we're in any rush, because if this pawn moves, we can take on d4 for free. If this pawn takes, then we take with tempo and play rook d2, and we can't be challenged, so that's good. Okay. That doesn't do anything, I don't think. Unless he wants to go rook c3. I think I've got him. Do I have an idea? Maybe. Take here. No, I don't like that. I actually don't want to go after this pawn just yet. I actually don't, because I think it's more important for us to control the e-file. Again, if king to f1 doesn't work because of bishop c4, check. If the king moves away, you lose the rook, and if you take, you lose the rook anyway. So that is an important part of this position. If I had another move, I would have played rook to f8, but I was concerned about rook c3 ideas. If rook c3 now, I mean, bishop to d5 looks fine. Maybe. Check. King f8. Looks reasonable. I don't think us giving a check does anything. Yeah, I don't think I want a trade. I don't love d5 because it does stop my rook targeting the d4 pawn via the d-file. But then again, I don't even have access to d7 anyway because his light square bishop controls that square, so yeah, it's probably not a big deal. Rook e3. Okay, rook e3 I completely missed. I'm not even going to lie. I completely missed that move. Okay, that's slightly annoying. Alright. Pawn down, bishop endgame it is. I completely missed rook e3. That is annoying. Of course, I want to trade on my terms. On the bright side, my bishop can't be opposed, which is why I didn't take with the rook here, because after pawn takes, the pawn's coming to e4. My bishop gets kicked away. I don't like that. Okay, he's trying to go bishop to e4. Makes sense. Okay. Bishop e4. Maybe I can play take and c5. No, because then d5. Makes sense. Let's go c5. Effectively, if I can trade off all the pawns and be left with a bishop versus bishop and pawn, I can probably draw that because I can always sack the bishop. Okay, we're going to try to break through and create a passed pawn. If we can. I'm aware of this king trying to infiltrate via f5, but that's going to take a little bit of time to accomplish. Is the trade okay for us? I think so. I think the trade's okay for us because d4 is so weak. Maybe. Maybe. not easy. Trading the bishops, I don't love the idea of, but I also don't love the idea of losing control of d5, because I think it's quite important. Okay. This king will probably come into c3. Yep. I want to go h5, h4, but if h5, he can go h4 and lock my pawn on a light square. I don't know. I'm going to go for it. If I get h4 in, I'm confident I can draw, because my pawn controls 2 of his pawns, so I should be fine. If a yeah, ooh, yeah, no, that's fine as well. Take. If he does this, he loses the bishop. If he takes my bishop, I don't know. Take feels wrong. I guess I just shuffle and ask white how he's going to break through. It's not easy. Not easy, because I have the constant threat of b4 if his king moves away. I am, however, on 18 seconds, which is not ideal at all. Yeah, if f4, of course, his bishop hangs. If his bishop moves, he loses the f3 pawn. If bishop f5, I just go king back to d6, and then f3 is hanging. If he goes here, 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 I'm not really convinced. Bishop f3. I'm not really sure how he's like breaking through here. He pushes g5. I can probably just set up a blockade of some form with bishop h5, something like that. Maybe even offer a bishop trade where my one pawn could control 2 of his pawns. Although he can probably sack the pawn and go through anyway. And then if my king runs along, then that's an issue. Maybe I can do this, though. Oh no, if I go here, then bishop to d7 loses. So I have to control d7. For the time being, anyway. So now he can go back, and I will happily repeat. Maybe I should consider pawn f6. Okay, no, he pushes. Yeah. Bishop e6. No, I don't really want to trade the bishops at the moment. I can't do anything with these pawns, but they're kind of hindering his king's ability to move, which is what's important. King to d5 would blunder bishop to d7. So I guess I just have to shuffle. I don't want to give him the e4 square for his bishop. Suppose he can just move the bishop and try and break through, though. Which is annoying, but... Yeah, or just do that. Or just do that. Okay. Well, this is a really strange situation. I think I'm probably lost, but... I mean, White has to figure out how he's going to do this. I'm trying to stop bishop to e8 and, you know, maybe try and go king f6 at the appropriate moment. If his king moves, I guess I go b4, and then b5 is no longer a weakness, and I'm closer to a passed pawn with c3 at the right point after the exchange. So White does have to be careful, and like I said, if we get to an endgame where it's like I've got just my king and a bishop, and he's got his king, his bishop, and one pawn, most of the time that should be a draw. Wait, no, I can play this. because bishop here I can just push. It should be a draw, those lines, because, or in most of those scenarios, because I should be able to sack my bishop for his pawn, and then, of course, white will be left with a bishop only, which you can't checkmate with. So it's difficult, these endgames with bishops, particularly. Or not, well, all knights, I guess. Okay. So I suppose I need to do basically nothing. That's the long and short of it, I think. I mean, c3 is too committal. I'm just going to lose the pawn there. So I think I just have to do a whole lot of nothing. And just try to stop this white king from infiltrating. Oh, maybe giving up that square is wrong. Pawn f5. f5, c3, take, king here. Pawn here, king take, bishop here, king here, take. I don't know if that's drawn or not. Take. c3, take here, here. The king manages to catch up. That's not good. Take. Oh, maybe b3. Sorry, yeah, maybe b3 is the move. Because then c3 is actually a threat. I don't know. Because white can't ignore me. Otherwise, I go c3. And he doesn't have access to d3 or d4. He goes here. Hold on, that's winning. Hold on. So if he takes, I push and I promote and I win. If he comes to d3, I just take and I win. And my opponent resigns. Yeah, that's nuts. Okay, well, we just won a pawn down endgame. That's brilliant. I definitely misplayed parts of that game, but yeah, this is kind of similar to the previous game where I think I misplayed the opening a little bit. I think I played e5 too early. I probably should have just castled first and then gone for e5. There was no need to rush that, because then there's no problems with the pawn being pinned. That was what I did wrong. And then I had to take with the g-pawn, and it messed up my structure. But yeah, bringing it back in the endgame, down a pawn. Yeah, lovely. Let's dive into the analysis and see what the engine has to say. Okay, so 84.2% accuracy for my opponent, 88.5% for us. That was a super interesting game, so let's jump into it. The opening starts off with a Slav defense, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, and we go for the semi-Slav. And I think in like the last video I did, the previous video, which was again in this line, I was talking about some of the ideas in the semi-Slav of breaking with c5 or e5 eventually to liberate the light squared bishop, either via this diagonal or via this diagonal, with b6 of course. Or even taking and going b5 is another way of doing it. But in both games, we've gotten the Cambridge Springs defense. And in the previous game, my opponent took on f6, which is a perfectly viable line. In this game, my opponent went for the main line with knight d2. We go bishop to b4. And with knight d2, none of our ideas really work. After dc4, for example, hitting the bishop, my opponent takes. We take. White takes. We got in the game, except the queen was on c2. Very, very similar. And I guess the pawn was on a3. But I go bishop b4. Queen c2 is perfectly fine. We take on c4. And again, white has to take here. Otherwise, he's going to lose the bishop. So bishop takes, and knight takes. And yeah, so queen c7 is the correct placement. As I mentioned, I have previously experimented with putting the queen on g5. But as I have figured out, the queen is completely misplaced here. After something like a3, take... Well, let's say we don't take. Let's say we drop the bishop back. After queenside castle, we're in bad shape. After h4, which was the move I remembered, we can't really go to either of these squares, because then knight to e5 comes with tempo. So we kind of have to go to h6, and we kind of just get overrun, if I remember correctly. Like, castle queenside, bishop e2, and I don't think we have good play at all. Our queen kind of doesn't participate in the game, and that's what I've previously found. So the queen on c7 is better placed. Even though it looks like you could run into issues on the c file, you should be alright, to be honest. So a3, I went back to d6. Bishop e7 is better, interestingly. We can take on c3, which I considered, but bishop e7, bishop e2... I think I was concerned about something like knight e5, but the engine says c5, which I admittedly missed, where you can't take because the knight hangs. So I will bear that in mind for the future. But bishop d6, take, bishop e2. Did bishop e2 surprise me? No, I don't think so. And then, yeah, e5 is inaccurate, and I should just castle, and if white follows suit, then e5 is a good move. Because now if knight e4 is played, after take, the pawn isn't pinned to the king, and I can just take. And after something like rook d1, bishop e6, rook d4, queen c7, rook d1, rook d8, I mean, we have a perfectly equal position, essentially. If anything, black might be better with a 3-on-2 on the queen side. Maybe. But I went e5, and... you know, if white castles and we castle, then we get the same position and we're perfectly fine. But the problem is knight e4, which my opponent found and I initially missed. And I've realized that after take, if I try f6, he's just going to go f4. And I have no way of defending this pawn well. Now, to be fair, the engine suggests going for this, where if white takes, yes, white is up a pawn, but his structure is pretty bad. I was more so considering what happens if take, castle, take, and take. And I was like, nah, that looks pretty bad. And it is. It's like plus 1.5. I was also considering what happens if, oh, what was it? What was the line? Oh, yeah. Queen here, knight here, queen e4, bishop f5, take, and castle queenside. I was trying to calculate that, and it's like, well, if white castles kingside, then rook d2, and we're fine. We're down a pawn, but we're very, very active. But white doesn't have to castle queenside. He can just go rook d1. And I mean, where's my play? I have no play. And this pawn will be easily supported with a move like f4. So I went for queen e7. The engine prefers queen d5, which I didn't consider. Where now, after this, we simply stop this. I thought that bishop f3 was a problem, though, which is why I didn't go for queen to d5. Engine suggests queen a5 check, d4, bishop b5, stopping white from castling. After bishop e2, I guess we repeat, obviously, so that would be fine. And if rook d1, a5. Interesting, but it feels like I'm going to get checkmated in the next 10 moves. But yeah, okay, I went for queen e7, knight f6, and I just can't really take with the queen, because again, queen e4, I'm losing the pawn, nothing I can do. So I went for gf6. My opponent castled, which surprised me. It's not the best move. I thought he was going to go queen e4, to be honest. Apparently that's no good, because after take, I castle, and apparently this is fine. I mean, I suppose we can put the queen on e5, and if you take, you fix the structure for me. But of course, white isn't going to take. Apparently it's fine, though. I don't know. I guess it's kind of like being down a pawn. Yeah. It's difficult to evaluate, but my opponent castles, bishop e6, engine wants me to take. But again, this just looks horrific. Like, okay, d4 is maybe weak, but look at my pawns. It wants me to go queenside and walk straight into this, which I didn't feel confident enough to do at all. So, like, in this position, for example, I was considering going queenside, but I was like, what am I doing after b4? Like, how am I stopping this? Engine suggests take, bishop d5, which, yeah, that looks quite good, to be fair. We actually have good counterplay. I went bishop e6, rook fd1 and castle kingside, which is still fine. Queen e4, bishop d5, queen h4. Engine says queen g4 check is best, but I thought that just helped us. Okay, it wants to go to h4 next, so I don't really understand that. If rook g8, e4... And if here, then okay. That's interesting, I guess. He goes queen h4, though, which I thought was a smart move. Rook e8 is good. Rook fe8 is slightly better. It's about the same, though. Bishop g4. Again, I thought he might go for e4 here. And I was going to take on d4, with the idea being that if he takes here, I take on e2. But he goes bishop g4, which I thought was smart, looking for bishop f5. And here, if I play a move like king h8 to prepare rook g8, I just get checkmated. There's nothing I can do. So here, I'm choosing between bishop e4 and pawn f5, both of which are the two best moves. The engine thinks bishop e4 is the slightly better option, the one I didn't go for. And I was calculating bishop d7, opening up this attack. Queen d7, queen e4, ed4. Oh, there's no check. I missed that. So let's say rook d4. Rook e4, rook d7. I still don't like this position at all. My only move is rook b8, and after doubling up, I just beg for my life, I guess. You know, it feels very sad. I thought f5 was the way to fight here. And white is forced to take, because otherwise he's double attacked and he has no checks. So, whoops, I did not mean to do that. Let's go back to... Here we are, queen e7. Rook e7, bishop f5, and here bishop b3 is the only move. It has to be played. If I take, if white takes with the e-pawn, then great. Position is equal. We're down a pawn, but we are very, very active. But the whole point is that white would take with the rook. Keep the e-file shut. He controls the open d-file. He can look for e4. He can look for a bishop trade and dominate the position. So bishop e3 is the key move, because if rook to d3, I have a skewer. So white has to play a passive move. Now, rook d2 is the best move, and this is what I was kind of expecting. I was going to go rook d8, pinning the pawn to the rook. And here, white has to try to fight with rook c1, ed4, ed4, because if rook d4, then I trade and go rook d2, I guess. Sorry, rook e2, I would assume, which is equal. So my opponent goes h3, though. Oh, wait. So in this position, I was choosing between these three moves. ed4 and rook d8 are very similar evaluation. After here, rook f2, e8. White's best move is apparently rook e3, just giving up a pawn, which I'm not going to claim to understand. I mean, I can see you can go king f2 and rook e1, but I mean, sure, you can do that, but it's a very weird move. Other than that, I mean, let's say you take king f1 doesn't work because of bishop c4, and then I'm just fine. So this is probably drawn. Rook d8 is slightly less accurate. My opponent goes h3, giving his king some luft. I go h6 because I don't really want to take. Now, the engine thinks this is okay to go for this position after rook e7. But I just thought, well, I'm losing one of these two pawns. I have no way of defending. I can give a check, but like, what, b6, rook a7, rook d2. I win back a pawn, but I didn't like this position. I just didn't like it. So I went pawn h6 to keep the tension. Rook ac1. And here I have to take. I need to do it now. Now, what I would love to do is go king f8. This is what I want to do. Because now, if white does nothing, then I will take, and after take, I can go take, whoops, take, and take, and now there's no rook e7. So now this would be completely equal. I'm sure of it. But I don't have time, because if I go king f8, what does white do? What was the point of rook c1? It's rook c3. And now I have to move my bishop. And when I move my bishop, I get hit with something like take and take. And now white is just up a pawn, and I have nothing to show for it. So now I have to take. And, okay, that's a mistake. The engine again wants to go for this line, which I wasn't convinced. So I went for this. But I missed the fact that he could go for this rook e3 move. Here the best move is rook e1, followed by bishop d5. So now with here, I guess I can move my rook. So like f1. But yeah, I miss rook e3. So king f8, trying to trade on my terms. I'm completely lost here. But of course, that's not how the game turned out. There's still hope. King f2, pawn c5. I'm trying to make something happen. King e3, c4. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, like, if I can get to a position... Well, not in the back of my mind. I was telling you guys. If I can get bishop versus bishop and pawn, I can draw that. But it's very difficult to draw these positions with the same color bishop, and there's a lot of pawns left. So, king d2, a5, not the best move. White is apparently completely winning here after take, and king c3, but that is the only line. Everything else draws. Like, let's say g4, then I take on d4, and if you go king over to e3, then I get to play pawn b4, and I'm drawing. So king c3, pawn h5. Here I'm really hoping that white does something silly, like pawn f4. Sorry, no, not pawn f4. I mean, what does white even play that's silly? What? Let's say, I don't know, bishop f5. Then I want to go h4. And my pawn's on a dark square. It's controlling both of these light squared pawns. And then it's not even like I'm down a pawn, because white can't use his... Like, these pawns are out of the game now. Completely out of the game, effectively. So that's... Whoops. That's what I wanted. But he goes g4, which is the best move. I take. He can't take with this pawn to create a passer, because I will win his bishop, so he has to take back. I thought that if he took here, I could push. If I take this, then I lose after fg4. I mean, it's completely lost. But I can push. And you can't stop the pawn from promoting. So, hg4 is forced. King e6. White here is winning if he takes on d5 and plays f4. But it's more risky. Like, it's not easy calculation, I suppose. Like, king e4. You either go a4 or f5. Everything else draws. So, you know. I mean, I say f5 is a pretty obvious move. Pawn f6. Can't you just go g5 here? And then push. And if I take here, gf6, king f6. Again, you have to find a4, though. Everything else draws. So, it's not completely clear. But bishop f5. King d6, stopping the bishop from infiltrating. Pawn f4 is inaccurate on account of bishop b7. But I go bishop f3, pawn g5, bishop back to d5, pawn g6, and I have to take, of course, otherwise the pawn will go to g7 probably. And I thought I was probably lost here, but of course white has to prove it. King d2 is a mistake. After king f6, bishop e8, and pawn b4, and this is now drawn. This is now drawn. I thought my opponent was going to do something like bishop c2 followed by pawn f5. This is what I was expecting. Something like this. It's still winning, but not that much. You have to go bishop d1, followed by bishop h5, followed by bishop e8. That's the only way to do it. But yeah, he goes bishop e8, pawn b4, a b4, a b4, king e3, and it's completely drawn. I'm down a pawn, but I have the lingering threats of advancing these pawns. So I just shuffle. White is the only person who should win this, right? It's a two-result game. White wins or we draw, in theory. But white could overextend, which he does. Bishop g6, king f6, bishop e4. And I realized that, well, I didn't realize this was winning initially, because I had calculated c3 and after take and push, the king gets back in time, right? So I was like, okay, that doesn't work. Then I was thinking, well, after the trade, if I just shuffle, I'm probably okay, because the pawns can't come too far, because I'll take them, and if the king escorts them, then c3 will win me the game. Like, I don't know. For example, let's say pawn f5, king f6, pawn d5, c3, bc3, bc3, king d3, pawn c2, take, here, king c4, king d6, and this is a drawn king and pawn endgame because I get behind the pawn, right? And I'm okay here. I just sit somewhere here and I'm fine. So I was trying to calculate that kind of thing, but I just realized that b3 wins the game. If the king had access to the d4 square, different story. Different story. But he doesn't have access. He can't cross the d file, so he can't stop pawn c3. And he resigns, because if you come to d3, I take on b2, and you can go to c3, but that doesn't stop the promotion, and you can't go to c2 because my pawn controls c2. So, I don't know, a moment of madness from my opponent. Luck, in part, for sure. But hopefully, again, similar to the last video, where we got ourselves into a very, very bad situation and managed to claw our way out of it because we just kept fighting, complicating matters, continuing the fight. And yeah, you know, I'm not playing against suckers. I'm playing against good players who are realistically going to be better than the majority of you watching, which is not meant as an insult in any way, but more so to illustrate the fact that strong players blunder. I blunder all the time, as we know. So your opponents will blunder. Take advantage of it. Keep fighting. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to see that video I keep referencing, then check out the video up here. It's the previous episode of this series. And if you want to see the whole climb to 2200 from episode 1, check out the players down there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.